I found out that a Ferrari 612 Scaglietti that I had ended up getting vandalized and sold through a Copart auction last week. Either too many are crashed, or too many are gone, or too many were never built. You know, a lot of what I've tried to do professionally as an expression of that passion is to explain what I mean when I say I love cars. So there's like 25 really good VinWiki car stories, and then there's about 50 abysmal failures in editing and production. As it turned out, the day we were gonna go shoot in Death Valley, it was the hottest recorded day in human history.
Welcome to another Original Motor Car Cars and Conversation. I am super happy to bring you a conversation that I've been excited about ever since we first spoke. This is Ed Bolian of VinWiki fame, Car Trek fame, does amazing stories on YouTube, VinWiki Car Stories. I'm sure a lot of people that are watching this have probably seen those. If you haven't, go and check them out. Just type in VinWiki Car Stories on YouTube and you will find it. Ed, you also have a personal channel where we get to know a little bit more about you. So I'm super happy to have a conversation with you. Thanks so much for bringing me into your home, into your garage.
And to tell stories.
Yeah, I'm super excited. I actually got to sit in the VinWiki chair and tell some stories myself. So you'll get to see me on the channel. I don't know if you're going to want to look at that or not. But,
you did great.
Well, thanks.
Great. And thank you for coming down, and thank you for having me on this.
Absolutely. Well, I just want to start out by telling people, I mean, it's hard to get a sense of just how special this place is, especially having seen it online so much, and just to kind of, see some of the stories behind some of the cars that we have behind us. But tell me just a little bit about what we're seeing behind us here.
Yeah, so fun cars here. There's always something coming and going, but some of these are real fixtures. One is the Cannonball car. So in 2013, I set the Cannonball Run record, drove from New York to LA in 28 hours, 50 minutes.
Do you recall anybody driving past you really fast in the last few days? Ed Bolian of Atlanta made the drive in 28 hours, 50 minutes.
This is the online petition pushing for charges against Ed Bolian.
Okay, I have to ask you, where were you when you hit 150 miles per hour?
There's a lot of answers to that question.
Oh my goodness.
That CL55 AMG stays generally not here though. Usually it's up at the museum in Clarksville, Georgia, miles through time. And just off camera is my newly acquired, but very much not new, 2012 Bugatti Veyron Grand Sport. It was the Frankfurt Motor Show car, then passed through Birdman of Cash Money Records. He gave it to Justin Bieber, then it went to Floyd Mayweather, the Losing Vert, and then somehow through some patience, persistence, and of course, shrewd negotiation to me. And then a couple of my favorite cars of all time, the manual transmission Lamborghini Murcielago LP640. I think it's perfect with a gated manual transmission, a big naturally aspirated Howling V12, and I almost fit in them, and so that makes it even better. But I've got one of the 10 US Roadsters and one of the 23 US Coupes. And fortunately, I was kind of the person that figured out they were that rare, so I got to buy them before the rest of the world knew.
So I've heard there's some debate out there whether through your venture with VinWiki app, you have also sort of contributed to the rise in value a little bit. Tell me a little bit about how the VinWiki app works, how that might or might not contribute to the value of vehicles over time.
So back in 2016, some friends and I started the VinWiki app, which we call a crowdsourced vehicle history reporting platform, kind of a social version of Carfax. And the idea there is just that everyone can contribute to the timeline history of any car by its VIN or by its license plate. And that was based on a couple of things that I did personally. The first being that I always kept a list of the VINs of all my cars on my website so that if future owners Googled their VINs, they found me and they told me where they went. And so, like just yesterday, I found out that a Ferrari 612 Scaglietti that I had for the exotic car rental company that I started in college ended up getting vandalized and sold through a Copart auction last week. And so the idea of kind of being able to zoom out from our ownership experience and see a little bit more of the vibrant history of these cars is what the app was all about. The other thing that I did that was really in VIN documentation was that, just trying to figure out how rare manual LP640s were. They were my favorite car, and when I started it, I was working at Lamborghini Atlanta in sales, and I knew they were a little harder than they ought to be to find. And generally that means that either too many are crashed, or too many are gone, or too many were never built. And so whereas the leading logic was that there might be a couple hundred of them, it turned out there were 33 US cars and less than 100 worldwide.
So the app really allows you not only to just keep track of a car you may have once owned, but you can really kind of tap into the rarity of the vehicle, see how many are available in the US market, worldwide as well, I guess.
Yeah, we built the infrastructure so that you could create lists based on any criteria, and that's kind of the main use case that most of our users have adopted. And so in the 160 million cars that exist in the VinWiki database today, there's more than 10 billion connections between cars on these lists. And so it can be a list of manual LP640s, or a list of cars that I've owned, or a list of cars that you've crashed into in your terrible driving history. Anything can kind of link cars together. Vendors use it to showcase kind of the cars they've worked on or the cars they've installed things on. And it's just a fun way to kind of zoom in and track the cars.
If people have not checked that out, do they just go to vinwiki.com and sign up? Is it free? Is it paid?
It's totally free. You know, whenever you start one of these technology companies, you think you're going to be the next Zuckerberg, and that was not really the goal or the thought. But it's still totally unmonetized, so it's free on your phone or on the desktop, whatever you want. You can go to vinwiki.com or go to the App Store.
Nice, nice. So how has that platform kind of given you a springboard? I assume it's kind of given you a springboard to do what you do now, which is the VinWiki car stories. How's that kind of evolved?
Well, that evolved in a very accidental way. So, you know, when you put an app out there, you think that people are going to download it, love it, tell their friends, a butterfly is going to flap its wings in Kansas, and a tidal wave means that everybody downloads it. But it doesn't work that way. And the mistake that most young technology entrepreneurs, or entrepreneurs in general, make is failing to understand their cost of customer or cost of user acquisition. And I didn't have the slightest clue what that even meant. And so I learned very quickly that I could get as many people as I wanted to download the app if I was, you know, at a booth at a car show with free t-shirts to give out once they showed me that they made a post. But that was costing me, you know, more than $5 a person. And I didn't have $500,000 to get 100,000 users, or $50,000 to get 10,000 users. And so I didn't know how we were going to grow. But about a year in, we had 5,000 or so downloads. And I knew that on the rare chances that friends of mine that had pre-existing automotive YouTube channels would come through town, I had a couple of heavily financed exotic cars. And if they drove those cars and mentioned the VinWiki app, we got a bunch of downloads, and a bunch at that point was like 50. And I'm like, well, clearly YouTube is the secret to app downloads. And so I called a bunch of friends, got a bunch of pizza and beer, and we sat around in my warehouse and we just started telling our best car stories. And so we shot the first 25 videos in a day. And the plan was not to release them on our own channel. The plan was to give them to one of these car YouTubers that I knew so they could have extra content, never anticipating that we'd ever have our own audience. And then they could release that content to whoever they already had, and they would then download the app. So I called DeMiro, who I'd known through college and everything else, and Rob Ferretti and David Patterson and Rob Dahm and a bunch of guys that were kind of these, you know, decade-long legacy car YouTubers. I said, hey, can I give you VinWiki car stories as something else to release on your channel? Which I thought was like a great offer. Like, it's quality produced content, more stuff. You get to keep the revenue from the channel. I just want it to be there. And they all said no, all of them. And I'm like, well, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. And they said, well, people subscribe for us. They don't want to see some random person show up every day to tell a car story. And I said, well, maybe they do. And so we just started releasing them. A buddy of mine from church had shot and edited the first 25, and he saw writing on the wall pretty early on, at a time when it was by no means prestigious to say that you were making content for YouTube as a person who was professionally employed in the video industry. He said, I don't want any part of that. So when we had about 5 of them
left, he saw
left,
early success as a tailspin for his trajectory.
Exactly.
Okay.
And maybe it was. I'm sure he's done great things, but I wanted it to continue, so I had to learn very quickly how to edit videos because I had no background in this. And I went out and bought the same equipment that he had used and tried to set it up in the same way, failed miserably. So there's like 25 really good VinWiki car stories, and then there's about 50 abysmal failures in editing and production that are kind of decent stories. And then slowly I got back through editing the next 500 videos to maybe like 75% of what he had been capable of, totally stealing his pattern and template, which he was obviously providing to us as part of the friendship. And so I somehow it worked and we grew really fast early on. There are sort of different seasons and paradigms of the ways that YouTube works in terms of how healthy the incubation environment is for up and coming or upstart creators versus seasons when they really do prefer the more established creators that have more of a reputation and a following online. And so, you know, we've seen those waves come and go over the last 7 years now of making content. I've released a little over 2,500 videos. About 10% of them have more than 1 million views. And we've got about 2 billion views across Facebook and YouTube and everything else now. And it just passed 100 million hours of watch time just on YouTube, which I don't even know what that means. It's a lot. And
That's a big number.
Yeah, and it has led, fortunately, also, in addition to becoming kind of my full-time job by accident, it's allowed us to have more than 500,000 downloads in the VinWiki app.
That's pretty awesome. I mean, you know, 100 million hours, it's like, it's hard to quantify something, I guess, that's that big. But when you think that, you know, for that many hours, 100 million hours, people have enjoyed these stories and you've helped bring them out, that's pretty cool.
It's crazy, yeah. If 6,000 years ago, Adam and Eve had both just started VinWiki and they hadn't stopped watching it until now, they'd be tied with the rest of humanity.
That's pretty awesome. In order for anyone to get to a point where they've achieved that kind of success, they're getting those kinds of numbers and viewership, you have to maintain focus, you have to really commit to it and make it work. I've read a little bit of your book, I'm working my way through it, I'm really enjoying it. You have said in your book, and I've also seen in some other interviews too, that you have a bit of an obsessive personality. You know, ever since you can remember, you've always sort of latched on to something and really taken a deep dive into it. So I'm kind of curious as to how that you know, relates to the channel. How, you know, is this something that you kind of foresee as a forever focus? Do you ever see that obsession into the automotive world, into the storytelling, ever taken a different direction? What's your thoughts on that?
You know, I think we bounce from obsession to obsession in many cases, but sometimes you're fortunate enough to arrive on one that can sort of outlast your eligibility in it. And so, like, I was obsessed with playing basketball as a young person, but my knees gave out and I stopped growing before Dwight Howard did. And so we had different trajectories in that passion and enthusiasm. And I think the cool thing about the automotive hobby is that it's something that can, you know, survive for a long time and give us things to do, which is always the goal, whether it's your job or a hobby, that you get to do it as long as possible. And I think when we all say that we love cars, because we're all the kind of people that our relatives say, oh, Ed loves cars, that doesn't mean the same thing to everybody. And, you know, it may mean that you love fixing cars or detailing cars or selling cars or buying cars or driving cars or racing cars or whatever the case may be. And, you know, a lot of what I've tried to do professionally as an expression of that passion is to explain what I mean when I say I love cars in as succinct and direct a way as possible. And I think the model of car stories is about you explaining what it means when you say that you love cars and your dad's Camaro and the pursuit of understanding this legendary factory and the history behind it, but also not exactly kit car that you have. And so I think there's all these things that you mean when you say that's totally different than what I might mean. But at the same time, it's totally authentic passion that we're all looking for a way to express. And so that was why the pursuit of the Cannonball record made sense in that period of time. That's why the insane car loans that I've taken on made sense, at least to me, at that time. And that's why, you know, really trying to find a way to build the infrastructure to help so many people capture those stories has meant so much to me that I can continue it. Because like a lot of entrepreneurs, I probably have a 3 to 4 year attention span. And I'm well past that in this exercise. But every day I'm excited that some other story finds an audience collectively in something that we've been able to curate.
The fact that you're well beyond the point where you thought you'd probably still be interested in this, and it's still waking you up excitedly every day to tell more stories and share this with more people, that's a great thing.
It's been fun and it's been rewarding. Back in 2016, I went to a reunion of Cannonballers at the Greenwich Concours d'Elegance. And so there were a lot of the vintage guys that had done this back in the 70s and early 80s. And they were sort of invited, sitting in a panel not unlike this. And they would just hand a mic and they were like, tell us who you are and what you did. They thought that was a 60 to 90 second prompt. It turned out it was a 15 to 20 minute prompt that they had no ability to rein back in.
They couldn't stop it
And
once
this
it
was the
started.
first time in decades that anybody had asked these people to share these stories. Their grandkids were well sick of it. And so the fact that these guys were so passionate, and that this thing that I had only recently come to have in common with them was something that 40, 50 years later they still couldn't stop talking about, I thought was just the coolest thing in the world. And I'm like, somebody else's grandkids need to hear these stories. And where does that live? How does that work? And how does that become a social media content strategy? Because whether it's your commercial work where you're taking a company's brand and trying to express that in a video series or a video product, or if it's your own personal experience, we're all trying to figure out how that fits on social media platforms. And to be quite honest, if you started VinWiki today, it would be a lot more like this, like a back and forth podcast style, longer form thing. That didn't exist in 2017, and Joe Rogan wasn't doing it for 4 hours yet. And so it was one of these things where it just made sense to me to build like the most vibrant and passionate and authentic version of a story, put it out there in a world where if you don't like whatever car it's about today, don't worry, tomorrow will be totally different. And you can always come back expecting something new, but you're gonna hear about the high point in somebody's life and their love of the automobile.
So when Ed mentioned the thing about my father's Camaro and my not kit car, you will be able to see those stories on VinWiki, so go check that out. You can get a little more context to what he meant when he referred to that. So you were mentioning the 2013 record for Cannonball, so time from New York to LA. How do you feel that your participation in the world of Cannonball has influenced your decisions that you've made? Do you think that that had any bearing on what you do now? Because there's certainly a risk-taking element, I think, to both. You're setting a goal, you're putting everything you have into it, and it might work out, it might not. Knock on wood, it seems like it's working out.
For sure.
But just kind of tell me how that participation in that has sort of informed your decision-making process and sort of what led to that decision to do that.
Sure. So in addition to being a goofy 1981 Rat Pack and Burt Reynolds film, Cannonball Run was a real race that ran 5 times competitively in the 1970s, in 71, 72, 75, and 79, plus a scouting run. And so I became really obsessed with this as a high schooler when I learned about the movie, learned that it was a real thing. And again, for me, the overlap of picking the right car, picking the right team, solving the problem in all the right ways, and figuring out how to drive all the way across the country as fast as you could just felt like the ultimate expression of what I meant when I say that I love cars. And so it seemed like the right challenge to chase after, primarily because it was so far out of reach. As you're entering the world and deciding on college and goals and jobs and all this stuff, it just felt like the right thing to kind of have dripping in the background of life, just waiting on you to go and fix the faucet, so to speak. And so I just thought this would be the ultimate goal. And nobody had advanced the record at that point in 20 years, since 1983 and the last running of the US Express, which was one of the continuation events after the stop at Cannonball in 79. And so I, constantly looked at the world through the lens of, all right, how could a cannonballer or a cannonball car accomplish this task? And a decade later, I was able to put all the pieces together, and in a 2004 CL55 AMG with 130,000 miles, we made it. And so we did it in 28 hours and 50 minutes, which was a little over 2 hours faster than the record that had been set not long after I formed the goal. Alex Roy and Dave Maher did it in an E39 M5. And, I didn't do it looking for fame or accolade. I really did it to prove it to myself that I was the kind of car guy and the problem solver that I wanted to become. And also for it to sort of boil your resume down to a single word, like Ed, Cannonball. And I didn't know that would ever mean anything to anybody else. There was no evidence that there was a community of modern enthusiasts that were pursuing this. I came to learn that there were some cheap car races and some old car races and things that were kind of a half-hearted tribute to the competitive spirit of Cannonball, and certainly a more authentic tribute to the wackiness that was Cannonball. Because even in the truly competitive races, only about a third of the field cared about the outcome. The rest were there for the adventure in whatever piece of junk car they managed to get to the starting line. And they were not worried about how many hours elapsed. But, in the immediate following, I was still selling cars, and it was a great branding piece to be able to sell more cars. I got to be on television a bunch. It was the most popular article on CNN.com the day that it released. I was on the Today Show and a bunch of other productions and things like that. So I kind of got a taste of, that 15 minutes of fame idea, but all I did it for was to have some article, hopefully, to kind of frame on the office wall of whatever boring day job I would inevitably have to continue making my car payments. And so it did far more than that, and it was a hugely satisfying end point to that goal. I didn't anticipate it being the beginning of sort of ringleading the crazy idiots that are still obsessed with this idea. And in an interview, I think with CNN, I said there's just sort of this little fraternity of lunatics that care about this today, and I assume that's who's going to be reading this. And it turned out more people cared, but we still jokingly call it the fraternity of lunatics because it's mostly masculine, and it is crazy people who, like you said, saw, understood, and sometimes managed the risks appropriately to be able to achieve this preposterous, otherworldly kind of goal. And I think being able to bond with someone over a hobby is awesome. Being able to bond with someone over a questionably terrible life decision is very, very different. And I'm not trying to paint us as a little Ocean's 11 get up and go, heist movie, but I am saying that the friendships that I have forged over that have been exceptionally meaningful in my life. Beyond that, the simultaneous growth of VinWiki as a media brand has given those Cannonball stories some legs beyond what obviously the old generation had to sort of tell their own versions of the story. Brock Yates had organized it along with Steve Smith from Car and Driver magazine, so once a year or so, a weird article would show up on the cover of Car and Driver that they managed to do it again and nobody got hurt. And still to this day, nobody's ever really gotten hurt doing it. And so that's a beautiful thing. But I think the fact that we now have been able to initially shove it down the audience's throat, like, you care about this because I'm going to tell you more about it until you tell me how much you love it. But now there is some demand for it. And I think the fact that for probably the first 3 years of VinWiki's existence, Cannonball stories did 10% of the views that a Lamborghini story might. Okay. And now it's pretty good, and sometimes they do really, really well. And so I never anticipated that, but it's been a very happy coincidence.
So it seemed like there was some resurgence in the Cannonball idea during COVID because there were a unique set of circumstances where nobody was on the roads.
Right.
And I think there were groups, pockets of people all over that said, we could probably beat some records because there's not as much interference here. So how does that sit with you? I know that it's probably good to see the spirit continue, but I know that there were some records that were beaten during that time, which was kind of a unique time in our world. What are your thoughts there?
COVID was an interesting era with respect to Cannonball, and it came at a time when, honestly, the modern enthusiasm for Cannonball was really exploding. And so it was sort of the perfect storm for chaos. And I mean, the whole world was in chaos, and it certainly didn't avoid the people that wanted to race across the country. And it appears that it was about a 4-hour advantage if you're trying to drive fast across the country and the cops are told not to pull anybody over and no one commutes to work. I mean, you can do it on a weekday, for crying out loud. And people were doing it in diesel cars and rented cars and leased cars and their dad's cars. And I mean, so I had held the record for 6 solid years, and then at the end of 2019, my record fell. A few short months later, the world shut down, and it fell again a dozen times in a few weeks. And so it was very much like, Hank Aaron and his family watching Barry Bonds and Sammy Sosa just demolishing baseballs like they were just built for it, because in fact they were.
Right.
And
so COVID was sort of the steroids asterisks on the beating the record to some degree.
Yes, with the exception being there is no governing body of illegal outlaw cross-country road racing. And one of the ways that I described it, and kind of upon reflection and making videos about it, is like, I don't have any position to judge these people. I chose not to do that, primarily just because you know, it was the perfect challenge for a moment in my life, but it isn't the perfect challenge for this moment in my life. And I've got kids and stuff to lose, and my wife had just had our second child at the beginning of the shutdown. And so I was not interested in going out and reclaiming the record or anything like that. And so I was happy with my popcorn on the sidelines, but I wasn't trying ever in any way to levy judgment on those that chose to. They weren't out there super spreader events or anything like that anybody could get upset about. And just because their brand of breaking the law differs from my brand of breaking the law doesn't mean that we get to fight about it. Like, we're still on the same side. And so I was excited to see, you know, that enthusiasm grow, that manifest in a different way. And goodness, I was glad that I didn't hold the record as that happened, because then I would have been faced with the same position that Doug and Arnie were in, the two guys that broke my record at the end of 2019. Like, we only had it for a few months after we planned for so long and spent so much money, because they spent 10 times the money that I did on this stuff. And they did it with 30 Scout cars and an 800 wheel horsepower E63. Pulled out all the stops, did it the way you would. And now they had to go out and redo it and take all the risks again just so they could once again have the record, and they do. But it was a strange time.
You talked about like seasons of life as it related to YouTube, seasons of life as it related to Cannonball. Certainly there's a risk-taking element in what you did with Cannonball. Certainly there's a risk-taking element in what you're doing with YouTube. It seems like you are the personality that will say, I'm going to pull out all the stops and I'm going for broke on this, and I'm either going to make it work or I'm going to fail miserably. I don't know if that's a fair characterization, but my bigger question, you can respond to that, whether you think that's fair or not, but also I know that you are a man of faith, and I want to kind of talk to you about what influences there. Is there a safety net there for you? How does faith play into your decision making, your risk taking, and maybe the successes you've had?
Sure. You know, I think that in the broadest sense, professionally and in the manifestation of my passions and hobbies, I have sought out to, you know, live a life that I find interesting, and if other people do, that's cool as well. And I think the legs that the stories have grown have been fun to kind of be an illustration of that. And I certainly am not doing much to avoid risks, but I manage risks, I think, in slightly unorthodox ways. And so, you know, you can buy a car that's been in a flood or been in an accident or 3 accidents, and, you know, that sounds risky, but at some price it has to make sense. And I love the fact that there are so many things that scare so many people about so many things that I like, that in most cases I'm not actually competing with anyone. And so even in the pursuit of the Cannonball record 10 years ago, there's zero evidence that anybody else was really trying at that point. There's a lot of evidence that people have tried since then, and I've been able to document it on the internet. But back then, it wasn't like marginally advancing every fall or every time it was Cannonball season or anything like that. And I think that finding something that checks those personal and potentially, you know, brand-making boxes that seems preposterous, that seems risky, but that you can step back, look at it without the fear, and just say, well, it really just takes this, this, and this going okay, and if that went real well, we'd probably have it. And so evaluating risk with just removing the fear element, in most cases, allows you to solve a fairly simple problem, and at least figure out what the recipe for success is, even if that recipe is relatively complex. And so I think that when I look at owning terrible examples of really cool cars, or driving really fast across the country, or starting a YouTube channel when that wasn't even really something to be proud of, a time when Doug DeMuro kept his $100 article job at Jalopnik so that he didn't have to call himself a YouTuber. But eventually it finds a way, and because you can kind of say, well, I understand why this seems flawed. I understand that in the typical conception of what this action, what this purchase, what this thing would be, my approach is bad. But if I just don't use that assumption, there's probably a shortcut here. And I think that's how I've generally approached risk, is to not view it as risk, but to view it almost as a leverage for perception, and a way to elevate whatever you're doing sort of in a fake it till you make it kind of sense, but also in the fact that when I drive my 3-accident spray painted 1 of 10 nobody else has car down the road, nobody else can tell that it was painted badly and that it's, you know, got some error lights on. I still love the car. It's still my favorite thing that's been made by human beings. And, you know, it's a whole lot of fun. And that gets influenced by faith, I think, in that, you know, the call of Christ is to, you know, go out in every way we can and try to be that manifestation of, you know, what we believe God made us to be. And God gave me a lot of weird talents that I don't know that I'm always grateful for, but I've seen them play out in some interesting ways. And they've allowed me to open up conversations and have evangelistic and mission-oriented discussions that I never ever would have been able to prescribe, plan for, have, envision, anything. And I think seeing the fruit that can bear to me has been hugely exciting, humbling and rewarding, far beyond what I ever could have hoped for. And God's been so good to me, even every single time that I mess it up and misinterpret and take the wrong turn. But I think the grace and the mercy that we see in that, as well as the triumphs that we can only point in the direction of things we can't control, it's just sort of that lens that makes it all make sense.
Does having that kind of faith and clear vision of what your mission, your overall humanistic mission here is on Earth, does that take some of the pressure off a potential fail in a professional setting? Does it make it a little more comforting to know I'm doing this for a bigger purpose?
Yeah, to know that my hope is not in good credit or good outcomes definitely helps. That if eternity is solved, what does it matter if the car breaks in the way that everybody tells me it's about to break, right? But also I think there's this peace that only that can provide, right? And if we're going to say a peace that surpasses all understanding, that should always be it. And most people, you know, have that peace in their family and in the way life works out. And if I'm able to sort of repurpose that peace into making ridiculous financial and sometimes irresponsible decisions, hey, you know, thank you, Lord.
Right on. In watching content that you have created and participated in, I get the distinct impression that driving is incredibly important to you, and it may, to some degree, have a spiritual component to it. I don't know. Describe to me what that seems to be your true joy in automotive is the experience of driving. Tell me about what it is specifically about driving that gives you that heightened sense of feeling with automotive.
Driving is the crux to my love for the car. And it feels odd to even have to say that because that's what they're made for. But it isn't necessarily what most people love about cars. In fact, you know, you walk around at Cars and Coffee anywhere in the world, and 9 out of 10 people, driving isn't really the reason that they love cars. They love them because of the business opportunities, or because of the beauty of it, or because they were able to fix it and pull it out of a junkyard, or because they saved forever and that is the trophy of whatever victories in life they wanted to celebrate. And all of those are valid. But to me, the car was made to drive. And especially in some cars that people don't anticipate to be driven, the fact that you do, to me, is kind of the ultimate fulfillment of everybody's plan that went into creating the opportunity to interact with that car. And it's not necessarily spiritual, but it is fulfilling. It is something that I truthfully enjoy. And I, especially as I stack the deck against myself to successfully reach a destination, there's a lot of drives that I describe as a race to the scene of the breakdown. And because I anticipate that, because they're not all good or fixed or ready, but I'm still going to go somewhere in it. And I love those adventures, those drives just as much. I just bought back the Flood Gallardo that was the first car we used for a series I do called Car Trek. And I always miss this car after selling it, but it was in a Santa Monica mudslide and was submerged almost to the top of the doors in the grossest mud, but it was freshwater mud. And I was able to make it functional enough to do this drive, and I drove it a little more. But I drove it back from New Jersey after the guy I sold it to 3 years ago drove it 89 miles. And the battery in an inaccessible place was broken and wouldn't hold a charge at all, not even after being driven hundreds of miles. And so I couldn't get a replacement, so we just had to push start it the whole time. And the gas gauge didn't work, and the headlights didn't work, and a bunch of stuff didn't work, but we made it almost 1,000 miles back from New Jersey. And it's so much fun to me to add the degree of difficulty and the degree of intrigue that trying to do maybe a mundane or maybe an extraordinary drive can be in a really terrible example of a really cool car.
Interesting segue, because the next question I had for you was around Car Trek. That's a series that I know I've enjoyed. Millions of people have enjoyed it, clearly from the views. From watching it, I just have a huge amount of respect for how many that you and Freddie and Tyler have been able to put together in such a short amount of time. There's 10 seasons, and they're short seasons, but it's a lot of content. And I'm super excited about the new season coming very soon, as I understand it, this time on VinWiki. Mm-hmm. It must be exhausting to put those together, I would think. So tell me a little bit about that, and then, you know, kind of what goes into creating a season for that, from a logistics standpoint, from a sponsorship standpoint, from just a sanity standpoint.
For sure. So back at the end of 2019, Freddie Tavares was in the middle of the most successful project car build in the history of social media. He had bought for $1,500 on Craigslist. After searching through Auto Tempest and going to all the Craigslist of the whole country, he found a van that was built by X to the Z Exhibit and the West Coast Customs crew on Pimp My Ride on MTV, and had then fallen by the wayside and fallen apart. And he had gotten it back, and in the series of 3 videos had rebuilt this car. And you know, at a time when a great automotive YouTube video did 1 million views, those did 10 million views. And they were #1 trending in the country. And it totally transformed the idea of what was possible. And he had stopped by here because he was actually driving to Tyler's house to give it to him as a Christmas present that year. And he asked me for my response to it, and the thing was ridiculous. It had like jean denim seats and a bead making station and all this junk. And we were just sitting around my fireplace, kind of just reflecting on what this meant for the future. And it was weird because it was really this pivot point of automotive YouTube content surpassing cable.
So you had already been seeing the success of these episodes by the time he went up to deliver the car, right? Or deliver the minivan.
I think the first episode was out. I was going to be seeing the car as part of the end of the next episode, and the delivery to Tyler was like the finale.
So you were already seeing the response that this thing was getting.
And I mean, we were, you know, in the barrel of the tidal wave at that point. Sure. And just seeing that and realizing we were at a pivot point in terms of what this can be. And I said, well, if this is possible, like, why can't we play fake Top Gear? A question we all ask to the mirror most mornings. And I said, you know, if really we think about, you know, you can do whatever you want with your time, money, and life, I want to play Top Gear because I grew up watching The Greatest Show Ever Made. And I said, that looks like the most fun humanity can enjoy. And he's like, well, we can't because it's expensive and we don't have all the budget and all this stuff. I'm like, well, we buy these cars anyway. Like, I buy terrible cars just like they do, and we take them places they shouldn't make it, and sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. Like, why can't we all do that at the same time? Right. And, you know, Tyler made great sense as the third. And at that moment, all of our wives were pregnant. So my wife and Tyler's wife were due with our kids at the same day. And Freddie's wife was due a month later. And so it was like, well, I don't know if the second series is going to be us walking out the front of a vasectomy clinic or not. But at the very least, you know, we've got some good reason for one last hurrah adventure. And my wife went into labor at the Amelia Island Concours, which was the finish line of Car Trek 1. And I was still 6 hours from home. And so I hopped in that flood Lamborghini, and with every remaining horsepower it had, I made it before the child was born. And so
that's good.
Yes. So the idea was just like rip off Top Gear as blatantly and unapologetically as we possibly can, and just put it on YouTube. And we're like, in a perfectly Clarkson and genuine sense, how hard can it be? It's real hard. And as somebody who has a much more professional background in film and cinema, You know this. I did not know this. In my world of YouTube, the camera doesn't move, the lights don't move, the mic doesn't move. I press record and it happens. And, we edited a bit, but I learned very quickly that producing more of a cable style show or a multi-episodic series is really, really complicated. But I also learned that it's even more fun than it looks. And the fact that we were able to so honestly live out that fantasy was perfection. And so, yeah, in the course of 3 years, we did 10 series. Each involved buying at least one, sometimes 2 or 3 cars each. And so I think I bought 14 cars for the 10 series. And then we have to immediately sell them because we don't have money to buy the next one. And just trying to figure it out, where to shoot, how to shoot. I did most of the logistical planning in terms of managing the finances, the sponsorship from Automotive, which is the only reason it made sense, because you can't remotely generate enough revenue from YouTube and AdSense as you to pay for this. But Automotive cared a lot about kind of the ultimate expression of their power over searching for cars being their power to supercharge content on automotive YouTube. And so they were like, look, we want you guys to use our website to find your next car because it works, but we also want you to know that we're happy and excited to invest in the highest quality content that we possibly can on YouTube. So finding the right sponsor was critical. That they were already excited because of the success of the Pimp My Ride van and the other successes that we were having in views on YouTube. And then just trying to put the pieces together and trying to plan. That being said, if we were actually making cable style content, they'd want us to shoot for a week an episode. And we were trying to shoot 6, 8 episodes in the course of 7 or 10 days. So we're working 20-hour days, mercilessly overworking the crew that had agreed to do it at cut rate to make it fit the budget. And, we're in the middle. Car Trek 2, we shot the most appreciated supercars. And we're like, literally the only consideration was, well, we need to find a place where we can have a track, a drag strip, a good highway, some good mountain roads. Vegas. That sounds great. Everything's close. Spring Mountain's close. All of it's close. Well, when was it actually going to come up? August. We didn't think that it's really unpleasant to be in the desert in August. As it turned out, the day we were going to go shoot in Death Valley, it was the hottest recorded day in human history. It was 128 degrees. And I'm in an Aston Martin Vanquish running on half its engine with no air conditioning. And we got to shoot with the darn windows up so you can hear the audio. Yeah. And I am dying. Yeah, and there's a few Ed gets upset moments in Car Trek. And that day was one of them. Still fun.
Well, it's probably a blessing and a curse that you didn't know how difficult it would be, because if you did, you might not have done it.
You might not do it.
And we might not have all that entertainment.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Has it gotten easier, or is it just as hard as you progress through to the 10 seasons?
It got easier because we built the formula and it worked a little better. We were still sort of throwing darts at the wall in terms of what premises might be interesting and what would really be successful, and also trying to step ourselves up every time, because we couldn't just rinse and repeat the same ideas or the same locations or the same cars. And so after 10 premises, we really wore ourselves out for 9 and 10. And I think we were all ready for a break. And then life started to get in the way a little bit more. And I think we've now raised the stakes of what the next one ought to be. And, we always joke, like, what if next time we all have to buy cheap supercars? Because that's what we do every time. So, of course, I can't really say exactly what will be in the new season, but it is going to be good. And this time, it'll actually be on the VinWiki channel.
Oh, that's great. I cannot wait. I guess the last question I have for you is, you had talked a little bit before about there are different seasons that you see on YouTube where, the algorithm tends to favor some new creators. We've seen a bunch of creators kind of, hang up their YouTube careers, so to speak. There's a lot of people saying, I've done it, I enjoyed it, I'm ready to move on. It seems like this is sort of a fertile time for some new creators to kind of come up and find their niche on YouTube. What advice would you have for someone who is either just starting a channel or wants to tell stories on YouTube or just, through their own blogging or their brand of storytelling? What kind of advice would you have?
What you've seen in the early days of your own channel, I think, is super exciting, and it's perfect evidence of the fact that it isn't impossible for an upstart creator to get some tremendous early traction, and that's really, really exciting. And I think, you look at the views of Matt Armstrong lately in the automotive world has been a phenomenal success, figured out the recipe, figured out the way to keep it going, and had zero background in this. Now you face a unique challenge because you're a professional videographer, and YouTube is a very hostile place for people that have skills at it. It's an amateur hour showcase where guys like me can sort of feel their way through it and stumble into some level of success. And so what I like to say is that on YouTube, the output drives the input. In the rest of the whole wide world, your skills, your input ability drives the output. But in the world of social media content creation, as you advise commercial clients, you have to stick to an output cadence that works for yourself, works for your brand, and works for the platform very critically, or else growth just cannot happen. And so I sort of just decided that we were going to release every weekday on June 25th of 2017, and we have every day since, simply because early on I wanted to figure out if it was going to work or not as fast as possible. And since then I felt, well, don't fix it if it ain't broken. And so the fact that I need to release a video every day means that I can only really invest about 10 hours per video between me and my two editors to be able to get the right piece of content out.
And that's everything, shooting.
That's all of it, yeah. And you know that an hour per minute of production versus final product is about as, as efficient as you can be making social media content that isn't just shouting into a vlog camera and, putting it in Windows Movie Maker. And so I think that is something that all content creators need to learn, is that whatever the platform demands for growth is what you got to stick to. And even if it doesn't fit your whole thing, and what they see is that content creators like us that are years and years in generally back down and make 1 or 2 videos a month, get crazy view counts, sell huge sponsorships, and that's the business model. I didn't catch that train, and so we still make videos every day. But that's also because, some of our videos aren't going to get any views, and that's okay. I like them because they're really good stories, and the people that do click through and watch them, even if they don't have the clickbaitiest title and thumbnail, are still going to have a great experience, and it means a lot to me and to the storyteller for those to exist. But that means that I'm not going to have every video do 500,000 views. It just doesn't work that way. Plenty will, some will, whatever. But at the end of the day, it all works because it's nice evergreen content that is just as valid 10 years from now as it is today, because it didn't happen yesterday.
Well, Ed, I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you for inviting me in and sitting down and having the conversation. I'm still like ecstatic about just being able to be here. I'm hoping that maybe we'll have a chance to do some more conversations in the future.
That would be wonderful.
If you want to check out more stories from VinWiki Car Stories and the new season of Car Trek, go check out Ed's channel. It's amazing the amount of content that they have, the quality of content, super entertaining content. So thanks for watching.
Like and subscribe.